What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the story about how I learned to program in React. My first attempt at learning React was unsuccessful. It was last summer, and at this point in time, I had been programming for 18 months, but all of my programming experience was in Python. At the time, I was working on a big Python project, and learning React was a side project. I was attempting to build a web application for this Python project that I was working on. I had no prior experience learning JavaScript, and I thought that I could just jump right in and learn React. The major difficulty that I had was being able to separate out what was React and what was JavaScript. Of course, React is written in JavaScript, but there's also JSX. And in general, React just has an opinionated way of writing JavaScript. At the time, it was very difficult for me to wrap my head around how JavaScript worked as a programming language and how React worked as a system. When you set out to learn to program, the first question is, what programming language should I learn? And a lot of the experts will tell you it doesn't matter. Just pick a programming language and just learn it. There's some truth to this, but there's also another side to this as well. It takes a tremendous amount of time to learn a programming language, and you want to make sure that you're investing your time into learning the right things. Ultimately, programming languages are tools to help you get things done. So it's important to think about what are the things that you want to get done and which programming language is going to best help you get those things done. It's not necessarily the case that everything that you learn in one programming language is going to be readily transferable to another programming language, especially in the beginning when you're just learning to program. For example, up until this point, I had spent all of my time learning Python. Trying to learn JavaScript for this first time was very difficult because my mind worked in Python. So it was not the case that I could just transfer all of my Python programming knowledge over to JavaScript and get up and running in React in no time. That summer, I did not make any progress on this web application. After that summer, I started a master's program, and in my first semester, I took a class called Design of Software Systems. In this class, we were tasked with building a web application. On my team, I was the person who led the front end development, and I did this intentionally because I wanted to learn JavaScript. Surprisingly, I chose not to use React for this project. Instead, I decided to program in vanilla JavaScript so that way I could really learn the fundamentals. The project that we had to build was a card maker system. The project goals consisted of a number of use cases that our application had to be able to do. Our professor would grade this project by going through the use cases and trying to do each one of them in our application. So all we had to do was just build out the functionality. This was very challenging for me to do because, again, I was running into the roadblocks of just not really understanding how JavaScript worked. But having these use cases, having a deadline, and having some accountability, I was able to get a working version of the website up and running. During the semester, we had various deadlines where we had to do a portion of the use cases. So if there were 20 use cases in total by the end of the semester, for the first deadline, maybe we did 5, and then for the second deadline, it was up to 15, and then by the end, you had to put together all 20. As you're developing for more and more use cases, the complexity starts to increase exponentially. So the amount of work that you're doing is not necessarily linear. As I was building this application, I would push to a deadline to get the use cases working. But after I completed it, I would sit back and think about my design and how the application was built and realize that there was a better way to do it. Because I was so motivated to learn JavaScript, I would go back and re-implement my code and build it so that I could extend it easier for the next set of use cases. I really worked hard on this project and tried to think of the best design possible and work on writing really good code. After all, this was for a university class, and the whole point of this class is it's a learning exercise. So it's not like I'm working for a company and using lean product methodology or something like that. I'm just trying to learn and get as much out of it as possible. During the course of this semester, I wrote and rewrote this application multiple times, and by the end, I felt very comfortable with my ability to program in JavaScript. I was very worried that I would lose this skill after this course because I wouldn't be able to work in JavaScript anymore. But luckily for graduate school, I was doing rotations in different labs, and my next lab rotation was to work on building a web application. This time around, I decided to use React. So to recap so far, I had first attempted to learn React. Then I went back and built a web application in vanilla JavaScript. I built and rebuilt that web application many times. And now finally I'm coming back to learning React. When I set out to learn React, I followed one tutorial. This was an introduction to React tutorial by Chris Hawks. In this tutorial, he was using TypeScript, functional React components, and React hooks. I respect Chris Hawks' opinion, so I decided to follow this approach to learning and building in React. I did not spend much time following tutorials. I simply read the React documentation and I followed this one tutorial. From there, my approach to learning React was very similar to how I learned to build web applications in vanilla JavaScript. I built this application many times. I did this partially out of necessity because my lack of understanding of how React worked made my design decisions very poor. And as soon as I tried to extend this application that I was building, I could see that I didn't understand how React worked. So I would go back and rethink my design. I wrote the first version of my web application using TypeScript, but because I didn't really understand the fundamentals of TypeScript, I started to hit many roadblocks in trying to determine what was React and what was TypeScript. So the first rewrite of my application was to drop TypeScript and write my application in JavaScript. If you're not fully familiar with JavaScript or TypeScript or React, I definitely recommend writing your first React applications in JavaScript. Again, I wrote and rewrote this application about a half a dozen times within the course of a couple of months. It wasn't a major application, so a lot of times it would just be me restarting the project from scratch, using parts of the code that I had previously written, but just structuring it a little bit better and doing that from a clean slate. After a couple of months of working on this web application, I was then tasked with building a second web application. And again, I was going to build this one in React. This time I was inheriting somebody else's code who had previously been working on this project. So now I was able to read somebody else's code and see how they were approaching building a web application. And I tried to reuse the structure that they had as much as possible. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I wanted to work with what was already there. Around the same time, I dedicated more time to following through on a React tutorial to learning the fundamentals of React. I followed a teacher named Kent Dobbs, and this was extremely helpful because now I had it in my mind how I thought React worked. And I knew that there were some hangups in my mental models of React. So my brain was primed to take in as much information from this tutorial as possible. And I did learn a lot. Now I was able to go back to the application that I was building and structure them in a much better way. When I learned React, I decided to not use class-based components. I strictly stuck with the functional way of writing components, and I also learned React hooks. It was very difficult for me to wrap my head around how React hooks work, and that was one of the things that made it take much longer for me to learn React. All in all, for me to learn JavaScript and React, it took about 4 months. And I was not working on this full time. I was a full-time student who was also working on other projects, and I also had to learn Java to build a few projects in Java during the same time. I'm still learning React. I'm still working in React. Every day I'm writing programs in React. And from when I first started learning React to now, I have implemented at least 20 different projects. Maybe this was just to test something out really simple, or maybe I was rewriting one of my applications. But the point is that I learned by making many attempts at building projects in React, thinking about how to design applications, and then going ahead and implementing it. That's it for today. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.